Okay, so we'll keep building out our character. Makes sense to start out with a symmetry object again, since we will be doing legs, and in this case they will be symmetrical. So we'll hop into Cinema and start doing that. So we'll start off by adding a symmetry object, which we are pretty familiar with by now. So I'll come over to this little icon here again, the subdivision surface icon, press and hold, and we will create a symmetry object like that. We can actually go ahead and name this leg symmetry, just so we are organized from the get-go. And in my case, this will be a round old leg, which makes sense to start with a cylinder in this case. So I'll just go ahead and click and drag over at our primitives. Let's go over the cylinder. I'll go ahead and scale it down to around 7 centimeters in thickness, or in the radius, something like that. And I'll scale it down to around 50 centimeters in height. And I'll just come up here, drag it up. We'll just kind of angle the viewfinder just a bit so we can see a bit better what we're doing here. And with that kind of in place, I'll just go ahead and drag and drop our cylinder into our leg symmetry. And since it's currently right in the center, we won't really see this do anything. But if we move it out to the left here, we'll start to see what our legs are going to look like. And obviously I don't want completely straight legs like this. I want them to be a bit more angled, like legs would be. So I'll go ahead and select it, press R for the rotate tool, and I'll just rotate it out about like 6 or 5 degrees, something like that, to a point where it feels natural to you. And I just kind of moved them out. I want her to be standing like pretty wide-legged, so she's got a very like confident and like badass pose. And I'll just drag these out to somewhere around here. I think in this case, it's very much up to you what you kind of see your character doing. I think in this case, or in my case, I kind of like the position where they are right now. Obviously, we can come back and adjust this if we feel like we need to down the line. So with this in place, I kind of move on. We'll go ahead and group this cylinder. So we'll press Alt-G, which will put our cylinder into a null, and we will call this null leg. And the reason why we do this is just so we can drop things into our leg null very easily and have them align to the rotation that we just made to our leg. So when we create the boot, for example, we want this to follow the angle of the leg, so we can just drop things into our leg null and we can align them along these coordinates. But before we get into the actual boot, I'll kind of want to taper this leg off just a bit. So we can do that the same way we did for our head. So we can come over here to our deformers and we'll drag and drop over the taper here. And I'll just drag it into our cylinder and hit fit parent. As you can tell, the taper is in the wrong direction currently, so I'll do the same thing as we did previously. I'll come over to the alignment, set to -y, and set fit to parent again. Great. And I don't want to taper this too much. I kind of just want to taper it just a bit, so maybe somewhere around 20%. I think that works for me. I still want like the chunky and the thick features on this character. And like previously, if we come over to our lines display, we kind of see that we don't have that many height subdivisions to work with here. So I'll just go into our cylinder and just up these just a bit so we have a bit more of an even distribution. Maybe go ahead and up the rotation segments as well. Set them to 32 just so we have a good even number like that. And I'll turn off the line shading as well. And we want some boots for our character, right? We don't want her feet to be completely bare and cold. I'll start out with our boot by creating a torus, which is basically another primitive that we can find here in our primitives column. So if I just click and drag over the cube, we'll get a torus. We'll release on that, and it will be massive, of course. But I'll come over to our scale tool or press T, and I'll just scale it down uniformly at first, somewhere around there. I'll go ahead and drag it into our leg null, and this is kind of where you see why we created this and why it's handy to have it there. So now we can just zero out the position and the rotation coordinates here, and I'll just go ahead and drag it down along the local axis of the leg null, not the world coordinates, as you can tell by shifting from world coordinate to the local coordinate. So I'll just drag it down along the side of this leg here. And I'll kind of want to scale the radius and the pipe just down a bit, or scale them up actually. So I'll just increase the size of the ring here so they wrap around the leg nicely. And I'll set the pipe radius to somewhere around 3.5, something like that. And since we're not going to see the ends of our legs, it doesn't really matter what we have going on here. So I'll just put this torus at a place where I feel comfortable with it. And we'll continue with our boot by actually duplicating our leg cylinder here. So I'll just come over here to our objects panel, control, drag and drop. We have our duplicate, and I'll change the radius of the, I guess this will be like the continuation of the boot. So I'll set this to around 9.5 in the radius, just so it's slightly thicker than our leg. And I'll go ahead and pull it down as well. We don't want it to cover our entire leg. We want the boot to kind of start where the torus is. And I'll come over and change the height of it as well. Just to somewhere around like the low 20s, something like that. It doesn't really matter too much if it's clipping through the floor, because we will deal with that later. But maybe we can move up the torus and the cylinder just a bit, something like that. Yeah, good. And of course, we'll also want to reconfigure our taper, because this is scaled based on the size of our leg previously. So we'll just come over here and set fit to parent. And I'm pretty happy with the tapering that's going on here. Maybe I'll just lower the curvature a bit so you can see what the curvature is doing. It's kind of adding a bit of a curve to the taper, and I'll kind of want it to be more of a straight taper. So I'll kind of set it to somewhere around, yeah, almost 0, like 22, 23, 24, something like that. And like before, we'll come over and look at our geometry. This is looking quite decent, but I will go ahead and increase the segments of our torus. So I'll just increase this to something around this, just so we have, again, even distribution. That looks good for now. And with that in place, I'll actually come over to the cylinder that will work as our boot, and I will group that. So I'll just press Alt-G. I'll call this our shoe. And I will also make sure that our torus is within this null as well, like that. And obviously we want some place for our character to put our toes. So we'll want to extend this shoe out from here. And instead of actually going in and modifying the shape of this cylinder, I like to just add another primitive and then kind of blend it all together. So we can actually come over to our primitive panel here again, and we will create a capsule like that. And it will be massive, of course. We'll hit T, scale it down just a bit, and I will drop it into our shoe null. So we'll come over here and zero out the coordinates and the rotation as well. And I'll select my rotation tool, rotate it out, hold shift so we snap it along the degrees, something like that. And I'll just go ahead and like drag it around just to kind of place it something like this. I'll shorten it just a bit, take our scale tool again, and just scale it out, something like that. And I'll also go ahead and increase the segments because we don't have a lot to work with here. So I'll just increase mostly the cap segments, which is like the rounding on the ends here. Set that to 12, and then maybe 32 for the rotation segments, like that. Great. All right, so I think I'll shorten it just a bit and move it in a tiny bit as well. We don't want it to come out on the other side unless you want some like heel out sticking parts here, but I don't want that. I want it to look something like that. And it looks a bit wonky when our character is standing like with just the feet right out straight like this. So we obviously want to rotate the shoe just a bit. So if we just come over to our shoe null here, we'll select the rotate tool and we will rotate it out something like this. Maybe around 20 degrees. Do you think that's enough? You don't want her to be looking like this, like a duck. Maybe... Yeah, so maybe that's like around 35 degrees, maybe 30. I'll just rotate it 5 degrees in. And obviously, as you can tell, it doesn't really look like our shoe is one piece of an object. It just looks like a bunch of primitives stuck together, which it is right now. So instead of having it looking like this, there is a way in Cinema to kind of blend different shapes together. And you do that using a tool called the Volume Builder. And that's kind of a tool that I guess you can view it as if you're taking all of your geometry and you're kind of filling them out with like a substance or something. which allows you to kind of blend them together almost as if it's like in a liquid form, but of course it stays put. You'll kind of see how it works once I start working it through, but it's a really nice way just to kind of blend shapes together and also use other shapes to subtract and cut out certain parts, kind of using it as a clipping mask like you would do in Illustrator. So we'll go ahead and do that. I think this is a really easy and a nice way of modeling. It might be a bit heavy, but it allows us to stay true to our like primitive shapes that we are using. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll have our shoe selected, and within our shoe I basically have all of the objects that I want to blend together. So if I'll have the shoe selected, I'll come over here to this volume builder icon. I'll hold Alt as I release on the volume builder. So now you can see what this kind of does to our shoe. It kind of just turns it into these voxels is what it's called. And if I just start decreasing the sizes of these, you kind of see how our shape starts to come back. And before I do anything more with this, so this is basically like the volume that is getting filled out within our piece of geometry is kind of what you could call it. So to turn this into actual geometry and a mesh that we then can render, we'll need to put the volume builder that we created within a volume mesher. That's what I'll be doing. I'll hold Alt and release on the volume mesher icon here, like that. And as you can tell, there's a lot of detail and like geometry that has gone missing. It looks very crude. So to increase the amount of detail from our objects that we have within the volume builder, we will decrease the size of this. This is called the voxel size. And I think 0.3 centimeters would work for us. So it doesn't get too heavy, but we still have some detail to work with. And as you can tell, we can kind of see each face from the primitives that we had before. So to sort that out, you can either add a bunch more segments to these, but that's not really necessary. We can actually just go ahead and add an SDF smooth, which does exactly what it sounds like. It smooths out all of these details. And I'll set the voxel distance here. So I'll have the smooth selected, and I'll set the voxel distance to 1 instead. And our shoe is starting to come along really nicely. However, I do think we can make it a bit better by adding some piece of geometry that can then subtract this bottom part, because right now it's just clipping through the floor. So the way we can do that is really easy actually. So we're basically just going to create the piece of geometry that we'll be using as the eraser basically. If I just come over to our primitive panel here, I just create a cube straight up like that. We'll scale it down using our scale tool to something that can just cover the piece of geometry that we want to be erasing. So we'll basically want to just place it right beneath the sole of the foot, something like this. And we don't actually need this much to cut away from the boot. We'll just need like something like this kind of size. The bigger the erasing piece of geometry will be, the more performance it will take on your computer using the volume builder. So you want to make this as small as possible. So something like this works in my case, I think. And to have this cube erase this part of our geometry, we just need to drag it and drop it into our volume builder. And as you can tell, that automatically turns it into as if it's going to blend this piece of geometry with our shoe. But we don't want that, so we'll come into the volume builder and we'll drag it so it's actually being affected by the smooth as well. And we'll go ahead and set this from union to subtract. And now we can see what we tried to do from the beginning. So this is looking really nice. And I think I can drag it down just a bit so it's not like our character is floating. We still want it to like actually make contact with the ground. So I reckon this is looking really nice actually. And if you remember in my drawing, I made these like laces kind of shapes. And I think that's something that I want to add to my design here as well. Maybe I'll even move up this torus just a bit. And we can still, even though we have this in our volume builder, we can still move these pieces around, which is kind of what makes it so good. Because it just allows you to be very, very versatile with your designs. So I'll kind of move it up to somewhere around here. Yeah, maybe somewhere around there. But I kind of want to add these like cartoonish piece of laces, which are basically just lines going across the side of the boot here. So we can create them in the same kind of way that we created our eyebrows actually and the mouth using a sweep. So if we just come over to our objects panel again, we'll create a circle. I'll hold and release over the circle spline. I'll drag it into our leg null. So we don't want to put this into our volume builder null because they will actually generate geometry along the lines. And I'll just go ahead and zero out the coordinates like we always do. Perfect. And I'll just hit T so we have our scale tool and scale it down. And I'll rotate it so it's aligned properly like that. Just drag it down. And we'll scale it so it kind of wraps around the boot in a nice way, something like that. Great. Like before, we'll just make sure that we have our circle selected. We'll come over here and hold Alt as we release on the sweep. And obviously we need another circle to sweep around this laces circle. And instead of creating a completely new one, it's just easier to actually just control and drag and drop this original circle so that we don't have to add a completely new one every single time, since we are using a circle as the sweep shape as well. So that just goes for a bit of a quicker workflow. And I'll kind of scale this down just a bit, something like this. And I'll expand this sweeping circle too, so it doesn't feel like it's clipping into our boot, something like that. And if we just go ahead and take a look at the lines again here, the amount of geometry that we have in our laces is kind of turning, it's not enough really for a circle, so you can kind of see the edges as it's wrapping around the boot. And the way to increase geometry for a sweep is that you'll need to basically change the number of points that you have in the sweep. So if you just increase and decrease this parameter here, this number parameter, you'll see what this does. So I'll set this to 24, that's usually enough. And I'll kind of want to, as we did with the eyebrows and mouth, I'll want to shorten this shape just a bit. So maybe set this to around 85. And then I'll just rotate it so it kind of sits in front of our boot, something like this. Nice. And like before, I also want to add some caps to this. So I'll come into our sweep object, select caps, and just increase that to the max. And then also increase the segments. Lovely. I just go ahead and change to our garage shading again so we don't get so bothered by all of these lines. And I'll maybe decrease the size of this just a bit, the sweeping shape. And if you do want more of these laces, which I do, instead of actually just going ahead and manually copying another sweep, we can just go ahead and put it in a cloner. So a cloner does exactly what it sounds like. It clones a subject, so you can keep editing the original shape and just add tons of copies of it. So I'll just want to add 1 or 2 more pieces of lacing beneath here. So if I have my sweep selected, I come over here to this square with these dots on it, which is basically the cloner. And if I hold Alt and click on it, we'll do exactly what we've been doing the entire time. We place the object that we have selected within the new object that we add. And you can kind of tell that it's not really doing anything, and that's because the cloning grid is so big. But if I scale it down, you'll kind of see what this is doing. So we're basically adding clones in a grid pattern here, which is not something that I want to do. I want to add it in a line below the original lace. So if I change this from a grid to linear and maybe change it to 2 to begin with, the y-axis is not the correct direction for this. So I'll set this to 0 and I'll go ahead and expand it in Z instead to maybe 4. That looks decent. But I don't want it to collide with our bottom part of the boot, so I'll just move this up, which means that I also have to move the torus up just a bit. So something like this. Yeah, I think that's looking really cartoonish and nice. I can also kind of see that these are levitating out from the boot a bit, so I'll just decrease the size of this just a bit, like that. Yeah, that's looking really cool, I think. I like the look of this. And like before, I want a null that kind of contains all of our boot details and boot elements. And currently we have this volume measure that we've started to edit, so we don't have our shoe null up here anymore. So I'll just go ahead and hit Alt G while I have this volume measure selected. And I'll name this boot, and I'll put the laces cloner into here as well. Yeah, so we have everything neatly organized when we start adding more details to the legs and stuff. So with that, I think we are done with our boots or shoes. They're looking really, really nice. I love the like chunky shape language that we're introducing. So I think we can continue moving on with that when we create our arms. So I'll see you in the next